Chapter 7, Notable Proponents, deep dive into 2 to 3 famous followers who expanded the theory. The Socratic method did not perish with Socrates. If anything, his insistence on questioning as a way of life and as a path to provisional clarity proved fertile soil for those who followed. This chapter surveys 3 of the most influential heirs to the Socratic project, Plato, Xenophon, and Aristotle, who took the stubbornly dialogical method Socrates practiced and reimagined it for broader philosophical, ethical, and scientific purposes. Each of these thinkers did not merely imitate Socrates, they transformed his method into an instrument for building entire systems of thought, for training minds, and for guiding lives. The result is a lineage in which the Socratic method becomes a methodological seed that grows into different branches: metaphysics and epistemology in Plato, ethical pedagogy and political commentary in Xenophon, and systematic reasoning in Aristotle. In tracing their approaches, we illuminate what the Socratic method could become when taken seriously across different horizons of inquiry. Plato, from the Elenchus to a dialectical ascent toward knowledge. Biographical context and methodological aim. Plato, Socrates' most famous pupil, inherits a living tradition of questioning and a model of philosophical conversation. But where Socrates used dialogue as a dynamic method of exposure and self-examination, Plato sets his dialogues to work as engines of systematic inquiry. The early dialogues preserve the familiar rhythm of Elenchus, the cross-examination that aims to expose inconsistencies in commonly held beliefs, yet the method gradually expands beyond mere refutation. In many dialogues, the questioner's aim is not simply to show a stopper in someone's opinions but to push participants toward a higher form of understanding. By the time Plato writes the Republic or the Phaedo, the Socratic method has morphed into a procedure of dialectical ascent. Questions lead not only to clarified definitions but toward the possibility of knowledge itself, even knowledge of universals and realities that transcend everyday opinion. Elucidating the Elenchus while reconfiguring its aims. The Elenchus in Plato serves 2 complementary purposes. First, it acts as a diagnostic tool, forcing interlocutors to test the coherence and sufficiency of their beliefs. Second, it functions as a pedagogical engine, an exercise in disciplined thinking that trains memory, reasoning, and release from dogmatic complacency. Yet Plato does not stop at exposing contradictions. He leads the discussion toward a more stable form of understanding. The famous dialogues dedicated to definitions, Euthyphro, for instance, show this carefully staged progression. A provisional definition is offered, the interlocutor is pressed to test it, objections accumulate, and the result is a more robust, though still provisional, account of what is being defined. Plato's method also pays attention to the emotional and motivational dimensions of belief. It is not merely a matter of winning an argument but of cultivating a form of intellectual humility and a restless desire for certainty in the presence of truth. From Elenchus to Assent, the theory of knowledge and the forms. In the mature Platonic system, the Socratic method becomes an accompaniment to metaphysical and epistemological ambition. Down the line, the method is deployed not simply to unmask error but to guide the student through a sequence of dialectical steps to reach true knowledge. This ascent is most explicit in the Republic, where questions about justice, virtue, and the good lead toward an understanding of the forms, especially the form of the good. The dialogue ritual of questioning gradually gives way to a series of disciplined inquiries in which definitions, hypotheses, and rigorous arguments are tested against an intelligible order that transcends ordinary experience. The dialogic method thus becomes a pedagogical scaffold for climbing from opinion to reasoned knowledge, and from sensible particulars to universal truths. The pedagogical impact, the method as a curriculum. Plato's expansion of the Socratic method is inseparable from his broader educational project. If Socrates' aim was to refine moral sensibilities and to illuminate the limits of persuasive rhetoric, Plato expands the scope to a comprehensive curriculum of rational justification. The dialogues function as a staged classroom and educational theater in which students are led to encounter difficulties, confront their own presuppositions, and arrive, if only provisionally, at more satisfactory interpretations of reality. In this sense, the Socratic method becomes a training regimen for intellectual virtue, the capacity to question, to listen, to reason carefully, and to resist the seductions of rhetorical flourish when it fails to meet the criterion of truth. Plato's contribution, then, is not merely to replicate Socrates' habit of questioning but to institutionalize and philosophize it, integrating it into a coherent system that would shape Western thought for centuries. The Platonic enlargement also introduces a set of new stakes for the method. If Socrates used questioning to jolt the soul into awareness, Plato uses questioning as a means to situate the soul within a broad metaphysical and ethical framework. The dialogic method remains the method, but its horizon expands from the moral and epistemic improvement of individuals to the conceptual architecture of reality itself. The legacy is twofold: first, a powerful demonstration that the Socratic method can be harnessed to articulate a comprehensive metaphysical vision, and second, a pedagogical model in which the method serves long-range aims, not only immediate self-examination. Xenophon, the practical, moralized Socratic method. Biographical lens and emphasis on living wisdom. Xenophon, another notable student of Socrates, offers a distinctly different interpretation of the Socratic method. If Plato's dialogues orbit metaphysical speculation and the ascent toward universal truths, Xenophon emphasizes the practical, moral, and social dimensions of Socratic inquiry. In his Memorabilia and Economicus, Xenophon presents Socrates as a skilled questioner who guides others toward virtue and practical wisdom through conversation about daily life, household management, and social conduct. The emphasis is less on speculative metaphysics and more on temperance, justice, courage, and prudent living. The method, in Xenophon's hands, becomes a tool for shaping character and behavior. A method of moral pedagogy rather than metaphysical ascent. Xenophon's Socrates asks questions, sometimes gently, sometimes pointedly, but the aim is not to reveal the soul's hidden knowledge of universals. Rather, the aim is to reveal practical understandings of virtue and to help people align their beliefs with the demands of a good life within a social order. The questions facilitate a reflective stance toward one's own actions and dispositions. Are we acting justly? Do we know what temperance requires in a household or a city? What counts as wisdom in everyday decision-making? The dialogue thus becomes a workshop for ethical self-cultivation, in which the method functions as a diagnostic and formative exercise for living well. Dialogue as a mini-ethics course. Xenophon's method is not anticlimactic, it is pragmatic. The Socratic method in his hands becomes a series of guided inquiries that reveal not abstract truths about the cosmos but concrete understandings about virtue, justice, and prudence. In Memorabilia, Socrates interrogates a range of interlocutors about the nature of courage, piety, and sound judgment in conduct. In Economicus, he attends to matters of household administration, the role of women in household economies, and the virtues required of a good steward. Across these works, Socrates' methods of questioning are deployed to cultivate a habit of responsible decision-making and to distinguish sound practical wisdom from mere cleverness. The emphasis is not on metaphysical assent but on ethical discernment and social competence. Socrates as pedagogue of the soul. Xenophon contributes to expanding the Socratic method by recasting it as a pedagogy of the soul that can be deployed beyond the walls of a philosophical academy. The method becomes accessible to ordinary citizens, not only to philosophers in theory. This democratization of the method, taking the practice of inquiry into households, marketplaces, and civic life, broadens the scope of the Socratic project. It also foregrounds a key feature of Socratic pedagogy that would influence later traditions, the belief that moral improvement proceeds through dialogue, reflection, and the careful, repeated practice of distinguishing right from wrong in concrete situations. Xenophon's portrait is a reminder that the power of the Socratic method lies not only in its theoretical reach but also in its practical capacity to form virtuous character in ordinary life. Aristotle, the logical extension of the dialogical method into a systematic science. A pivotal transition, from Socratic dialogue to formal demonstration. Aristotle sits at a crucial hinge in the history of the Socratic method. While he is not a direct student of Socrates in the sense of being present at his public trials and conversations, he inherits the Socratic emphasis on questioning, definition, and coherent argument from Plato's Academy and expresses it in a form that reorganizes inquiry on a grand scale. Aristotle's method incorporates the dialectical habit of posing questions and testing definitions, but it moves toward a different end, the construction of a systematic, demonstrative science. In the Organon and the subsequent treatises, dialectic is not a mere prelude to solid knowledge but a central instrument for discovering first principles and for building arguments that can be judged true or false by methodological criteria. From dialectic to demonstration, building is science of being, knowing, and virtue. Aristotle's approach to method is suffused with a commitment to demonstration, classification, and logical rigor. He popularizes the syllogism as a formal tool of deduction, refining a method of reasoning that requires clear premises, transparent definitions, and necessary conclusions. Yet he remains deeply attentive to the Socratic insistence on questions as a means to eliminate confusion and to steer minds toward the truth. In works such as the Nicomachean Ethics, the Politics, and the Metaphysics, Aristotle shows how the question Socrates popularized: what is virtue? What is the good? What are the causes and principles of change, can be pursued through a carefully structured inquiry that moves from general principles to particular cases and from probable premises to necessary demonstrations. Dialectic and the common sense commitment to explanation. Where Socrates often sought to reveal tensions in people's beliefs through cross-examination, Aristotle seeks to resolve tensions by offering explanatory frameworks. The Aristotelian method begins with definitions and common notions, subjecting them to systematic scrutiny. It proceeds to catalog kinds of explanations and to articulate the relationships between causes, principles, and ends. The result is a discipline of inquiry that bears the marks of the Socratic spirit: clarity of questions, relentless scrutiny of assumptions, and appetite for deeper understanding, while departing from the purely elenchic mode toward a more expansive project of science and philosophy. The methodological implications for ethics, science, and education. Aristotle's infusion of the Socratic method into a broad scientific enterprise has several lasting implications. First, it demonstrates the viability of a method that can address not only ethical questions but also natural philosophy, logic, and political theory with equal seriousness. Second, it offers a model for education that balances critical inquiry with the cultivation of demonstrable knowledge. In Aristotle's hands, the educational potential of the Socratic method expands from the intimate classroom to a comprehensive training in reasoning, classification, and systematic thinking. Finally, Aristotle's method emphasizes the importance of starting points, definitions, and axioms that can be defended by logic and experience. This emphasis grounds the Socratic habit of questioning in a disciplined pursuit of reliable knowledge, thereby extending Socrates' legacy into the core of Western scientific and philosophical method. Notable continuities and differences: what these followers share and how they depart. Continuities. Questioning as a central tool. Across Plato, Xenophon, and Aristotle, the habit of asking pointed questions remains central. The dialogic form is not mere rhetoric, it is a disciplined practice aimed at uncovering truth, moral understanding, or rational justification. Care for the soul and virtue. Each thinker, in his own way, treats inquiry as inseparable from the ethical life. The pursuit of knowledge or virtue is not an abstract pastime but a form of life designed to illuminate how we ought to live. The aim of moving beyond opinion, whether toward universal knowledge, Plato, practical wisdom, Xenophon, or demonstrable science, Aristotle, the core impulse is to transcend unexamined belief and to arrive at a more solid ground for beliefs and actions. Differences. Tone and aim. Plato uses the method as a gateway to metaphysical and epistemological systems. Xenophon emphasizes practical ethics and civic life. Aristotle builds a comprehensive science with method as its backbone. Role of dialogue. In Plato, dialogue is a philosophical theater that explores ideas. In Xenophon, dialogue is a more direct instrument for moral instruction. In Aristotle, dialogue yields to a more formal, syllogistic, and demonstrative style. Scope. Plato broadens the method into metaphysical speculation, Xenophon narrows it to daily life and virtue, Aristotle generalizes it into the entire corpus of his science, from logic to biology to ethics. Legacy. How these expansions shaped later thought. The expansions undertaken by Plato, Xenophon, and Aristotle did more than preserve Socrates' method, they diversified it. Plato's dialectical ascent becomes the backbone of Western metaphysics and epistemology for centuries. Xenophon's practical moral pedagogy informs educational and civic practice, shaping the way philosophers imagined the teaching of virtue and the role of dialogue in everyday life. Aristotle's systematic approach anchors much of classical science and rational inquiry, influencing the structure of logic, scientific method, and ethical theory for a millennium and more. Together, these followers demonstrate the breadth of the Socratic method's potential. What began in a narrow university of mind, the questioning of a single teacher's interlocutors, grew into a culture of inquiry that could be adapted to the demands of metaphysical speculation, ethical living, and systematic science. They reveal a crucial truth about Socrates' method: its power lies not only in a single form of questioning but in its capacity to be reframed, repurposed, and reorganized to meet the intellectual needs of different ages. Balancing fidelity to the master with the force of innovation. In tracing the paths of Plato, Xenophon, and Aristotle, we must acknowledge that each is both faithful to the Socratic tradition and creatively distinct. They do not simply repeat Socrates, they interpret him. Plato embraces his rationalist, metaphysical ambitions, Xenophon emphasizes practical wisdom tailored to daily living, Aristotle transforms the method into a formal science that seeks universal explanations. Together, they illustrate a central rule of intellectual inheritance: a method survives not by rigid replication but by faithful adaptation, by preserving its core impulse while expanding its reach to new questions, new problems, and new horizons of human understanding. A reader's takeaway: what the Socratic method can still teach us. The value of disciplined questioning. The heart of Socrates' legacy is a reminder that asking good questions, clear, precise, and pointed, can illuminate claims, reveal inconsistencies, and invite conscious reflection. The connection between inquiry and living well. The best use of the method, as seen across these successors, binds inquiry to virtue. Knowledge without ethical refinement risks becoming a mere instrument, philosophy without inquiry risks becoming pomp. The dialogue, therefore, remains a gesture for both thinking and living. The power of pedagogical imagination. Plato's ascent, Xenophon's practical teaching, and Aristotle's systematic science show that a single method can underpin diverse educational aims: the formation of character, the cultivation of wisdom, and the construction of a coherent body of knowledge. The importance of historical contingency. The Socratic method did not rigidly prescribe a single way of arguing, it adapted to the needs of the moment. Our own use of the method, whether in philosophy, law, journalism, or science, benefits from recognizing that robust methods must respond to new problems and new audiences. Concluding reflections. Chapter 7 has traced not just the fame of three followers but the vitality of a method that refused to be static. Plato's dialogues, Xenophon's moral pedagogy, and Aristotle's demonstrative science offer three complementary portraits of a single intellectual impulse: to seek truth through reasoned questioning, to test our beliefs against reason and experience, and to cultivate the nature of rational inquiry as a form of life. In doing so, they show how the Socratic method can be both a personal discipline and a public enterprise: a personal discipline that disciplines the mind toward clarity and humility, a public enterprise that invites others to participate in shared inquiry. The portraits of these proponents remind us that Socrates' questioner's soul, ever curious, stubborn in the face of error, committed to the pursuit of what can be known, shares a lineage with every modern effort to think clearly, argue fairly, and live wisely. For readers who carry Socrates in their intellectual imagination, these chapters offer more than historical anecdotes. They present a living reminder that philosophy is not merely a set of answers but a method and art of asking well, of listening carefully, and of shaping belief in the light of reason. The Socratic method, in its most expansive legacy, remains a practical instrument for the ongoing work of thinking together, the perpetual dialogue that keeps philosophy alive. In Plato's ascent, Xenophon's care for conduct, and Aristotle's architecture of demonstration, we witness the method at its most dynamic, not a single voice speaking from memory, but a chorus of minds continuing the ancient practice, each in his own key, each expanding the theory without losing sight of its origin in Socrates' relentless, indispensable question: